It's not recording. Okay, we are live. Welcome to Midweek Mysticism. The official title for this episode will be Wednesday, the Shabbat You Never Knew About, Part 2, or a cliffhanger. And that will get us in. I'd just like to welcome, I think we have one new attendee this week, Nathan. So it's great to see you with us. We welcome you here. I would do longer introductions, but I want to use the time to learn, and so hopefully everyone will forgive my rudeness. So last week we were discussing the verse from Vayikra, Et Shabbotai Tishmoru, you shall observe my Sabbaths. As a preface, we had first talked about the four worlds making their entry into the Zohar. This notion that before Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim, that since hashamayim, the heavens, were the fifth word, that Bereshit bara Elohim et, these first four words of the Torah represented God's fourfold take on creation, that God studied the Torah itself kind of four times, deepening a study until creation emanated out of that very act. And there's something about the four that was related to the thing we had done before about new insights in Torah being creative, creating worlds, but false insights being demonic and creating plague and death. And one of the ways in which you don't mess up and have new insights create death is by repetition, review, chazara, coming back to a thing again and again. Just a note from one of my close rebbeim, my teachers at Yeshiva University, Rabbi Simon, he often says that people learn, like, he doesn't say it this way, but I'll summarize, with the ego. Like, people learn to know, to accumulate knowledge. But like the easier way to acquire Torah as an integrated spiritual discipline is to learn benachas, is to learn very, not slowly, but like, not like I'm trying to learn it all, but rather because that in and of itself is kind of already about knowledge as opposed to about integration. I don't know if I'm being clear, but this sense of being deliberate in the study, particularly of mystical topics, being crucial to the essence of the study being utilized in the right kind of way. So we're going to move on from all of that and continue with our study. I just want to note something Rabbi Confer flagged, that this fourfold Bereshit bara Elohim et, which was also based on a verse in Job, it said that he saw and declared her, arranged her, and probed her. That was kind of those corresponded, maybe Andy raised the point, what exactly is the correspondence to the four words in Bereshit, those four terms in Eov. So actually the Bereshit Rabbah, the Midrash, Rabbi Confer showed me, actually uses that verse in Job, the classic Midrash, to say that that was part of God's creation of the world, that God, it has it being three though, not four. It combines some of them and I should probably, I'll send the Midrash out in an email to you. Let's just say it like that. You could see how the Midrash works with it. Okay, so the concept is drawn on a kind of non-mystical version of it in the Midrash, using the same verse, but that when you see the Midrash, you'll see it does it in a very secular way compared to the Zohar. I don't know what you say to say something is non-mystical when you're in a religious thing. Like obviously the Midrash is not secular, but it's not mystical in the way that it's working with it. So, okay. So all of that was prefaced. Now, share. Why is my Zohar not available on the share? This is a Zoom fail. Hold on. It's a me fail on Zoom. Share screen, match.
Your audio also sounds a little gravelly. I'm not sure why. Rabbi, I'm not sure.
How gravelly?
Like whenever.
Like, is it comprehensible?
Yes. It's like whenever you speak, there's an undercurrent of ripples.
It almost sounds like you're too close to the mic. You get like air interference or something. If that's, I don't know if that's not meant to be a diagnosis, but that's what it sounds like a little.
Check 1, 2.
I think same.
Let me try one more time and then we'll carry on.
Are you using a different mic or microphone system than usual?
Now?
That sounded good.
Okay, we'll try that. So, so we're dealing with this issue. I'm just going to go back to it. The creation on the third and fourth day. So on the third day, it said, Tacheh haaretz dasha esef mazria zera, right? Bring forth grass, or let the earth, Tacheh haaretz dasha, let the earth bring forth grass, esef mazria zera, like blades of grass that will have seed. Tzvi temaha biyoma telisa hava dechtiv tacheh haaretz dasha, uchtiv batotzeh haaretz dasha, elahai ava gav dechtiv biyoma tzita, Revia hava ve'it kliya biyom atzlita lemebe echad b'la piruda. Ulevater yom revia it kliya vidute la'afaka omena le'umenate dechachad v'chad. Begin yom revia ihu ragla revia dukorsaya ilah. So the Zohar does a big thing here. Zohar changes the Torah. So the Torah says, this is really where we ended. In the right place here? Oh.
I think you want it to be at the bottom of page 30.
Yes. Now you might say that this happened on the third day, concerning which is written, let the earth sprout vegetation. And the earth brought forth vegetation. But although written on the third day, it was really the fourth day, included in the third to be one without division. So I raised the textual problem of the grass being created before the sun as a possible plain shot prompt, but the sun and the moon are on the fourth day. And so how can you have weather patterns without the moon? I don't know if they knew the importance of the moon to like tides and ocean currents and weather patterns or not, but they certainly understood that you can't have things growing without the sun in a natural sense. Yes, people understood for a long time that the sun was crucial to growing. I don't know, again, that's my read on what's going on, but that could not be true also. In any event, they're making the claim that these things that happened on the third day really happened on the fourth day. From the fourth day on, its work was revealed, yielding an artisan for each and every skill. For the fourth day constitutes the fourth leg of the celestial throne. So, what are we saying here? So, if we go to the Sphero chart, all of the 7 days of the week represent the lower 7 Sphirot, and this becomes important to the kind of Shabbat system. Now, the throne, a throne has 4 legs, like an actual throne that a monarch sits on. And Bina, the queen, or later even the king in our text, we'll see how Bina switches gender a bit. Bina is gender fluid in this text today, because she will be a she and a he in different parts, is on the throne. So if you imagine, we take this Sphero chart as pretty fixed, but you have to imagine that the Zohar is not working with this chart. They're working with mystical conceptions in their experience and minds of the Sphirot. And so Bina, that is the divine mother, right? Understanding and the place where God's will to create that starts with just a point, as we said, of Chokhmah, which lives in this locked palace of Binah and grows and expands there, or a thought which recursively develops through inquiry and understanding and application, etc., and is maybe integrated here at this unmarked place of Da'at. Binah is kind of the highest realm of God that we're going to be in relationship with. Everything we know is through Binah, emanates out of Binah, really. If we would draw this chart better, kind of from our experience, we might even cut off Chokhmah. We know Chokhmah through Binah, but we don't have direct access to Chokhmah, except as through Binah. That's kind of an idea that's present in the Kabbalah. And so Binah is at the top of the throne. We said before that Binah was kind of like God the mother, sounding Christian here for a moment, and then here Malchut, Shekhinah was like the daughter, God manifest in the world. This is kind of an upper manifestation before emanation, really. So loving kindness, chesed, and gvura, judgment, and tiferet, the balance between the two, form this kind of throne. Yeah, you see these are like 3 legs of the throne. But sometimes, but a throne needs 4 legs. It's important to understand when we say tiferet in the Kabbalah, a lot of times we're kind of referring to like tiferet as it relates to like all of the things it's attached to, not just tiferet isolated. So I think that sense is alive here. There's chesed, gvura, and tiferet. Tiferet really ending in yesod, and this is going to become important. Tiferet is a masculine phallic symbol in conjunction with Yesod, which is most explicitly the phallic symbol of creation, right? Creating the energy of creation. So Shekhinah becomes the 4th leg. So we kind of have 1, 2, and 3. 3 really being 3, if you follow, and then 4, the 4th leg of the throne. So if we're labeling the legs of the throne, it's 1, 2, 3 inclusive, 4. This forms the throne of Binah. In this example. Now, what does all of this have to do with anything? This is already pretty abstract. I'm just giving you like the basic outline. We're going to have to delve in to fill this with content to make it sensible. So what they're saying is, you have this masculine element of Tiferet, and you have this Shekhinah on the 4th day, right? You have God waiting to come into full manifestation or realization for us in our world, and Shekhinah, you have the realization in the world. The growing of grass is the realization, yes? When grass is growing, Esav Mazria Zera, it's procreative. It itself regenerates. In fact, the Torah text says there was grass, and the very next thing is Esav Mazria Zera. It generates its own seed. That's what the Torah says about it. So it keeps the chain of creation in a full cycle. So that already is the full apex or climax of this sort of emanation. So the Zohar is left not just with a textual problem, but with a Kabbalistic problem. How can you say that we have grass growing on day 3? Grass doesn't grow at Tiferet. Tiferet, we're still just poised to create, but we haven't yet created. Or in the Kabbalistic imagery, we're ready for creative mystical intercourse, as it were, but we're not there. We haven't done it yet. So there's no child yet. There can't be. There can be no grass. So they say, well, no, really it happens on day 4. And 4 here is kind of Shekhinah, right? It happened here. But they listed it on day 3 to show you that the union of Malchut and Tiferet, of Shekhinah and Tiferet, is complete. The union is complete. What is it? It's total. So you can even talk about things that happen on day 3, on day 4, and theoretically vice versa, I suppose. But the point of all of that is really to represent or to see in the Torah's description of creation and their perceived maybe textual problem of how do you have grass before the sun, or at least a Kabbalistic theological problem. Our system says creation should happen more tangibly on day 4, and yet we have something happening on day 3 that looks like day 4. You know what that means? That means that we're learning about a yichud. We're learning about divine unification, because once you have God emanating God's self into a sort of God personality, you run the risk of having 10 gods, right? Or as someone said, maybe Andy, you know who it was, a philosopher once said, right? a Jewish philosopher said, the Kabbalists are worse than the Christians. The Christians created 3 gods and the Kabbalists created 10. It's a quote by someone who is who am I thinking of? Oh, you're on mute.
I think it's in my book somewhere, but I don't remember who it was. I'll try
It
to look
is.
that up. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I did read it in your book, although I heard it also from Rabbi David Horowitz. So
Trust him.
so yes, but I heard it from I heard it from 2 people with PhD in front of their name. Okay, so it must be true that someone said it. So it's been published in a book. So we have a problem, yeah? So the answer is, well, no. It's listed on day 3 to show the very kind of unifying force that's necessary in order to bring these diverse parts together, right? We have to create unification. We have to create unification in our world with the divine in order to have anything. Our world doesn't exist if it isn't unifying with the divine. Certainly not new creation coming forth for the first time. And so that only happens and so they're showing that by melding the days into one. Melding the days into one is a symbol of the divine creative unification of Malchut and of Shekhinah and Tiferet. Does that make sense a little bit? A little bit? This is a tough point, so I want to make sure it's an essential point. So it's also a radical point because the Zohar is willing to say, well, our theology says that what it says in the Torah isn't quite right. So not let's amend our thinking about this whole thing, but rather it's really a key to a secret that the Torah is letting on. It's a tremendous way of dealing, if you look at it kind of from the outside, with a problem to your way of thinking, if you presume that the Torah is prior to your way of thinking. So obviously don't, right? This is first and foremost. Okay. Now, when we said from the 4th day on, its work was revealed, yielding an artisan for each and every skill. The 4th day of the week, Wednesday, today is the 4th day of the week, the Jewish week. So if you wanted to do days of the week, we have 1, 2, 3, but then we just said Shekhinah is 4, right? But we also have 4, 5, 6. Wednesday is Netzach, Thursday is Hod, Friday is Yesod, and Shabbat is 7. So we have an overlapping system of 1, 2, 3, 4, but 4 is also 4, 5, 6, 7. So 4 is twice. Do you see this in the system? We have 2 mini weeks within the week. 2 mini weeks within the weeks. So too in the Kabbalah, the priestly blessings. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, 1 blessing, but there are 2 blessings. Yer Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka, 1 blessing, but 2 blessings. And so developed the Kabbalistic custom of sometimes bowing to the right and the left during the first 2 parts of the priestly blessings. That's an aside. But so the basic idea here is that Wednesday is a little bit of Shabbat, a little bit of Shekhinah, right? Which is why Wednesday becomes a kind of cutoff for like which Shabbat you're going towards, right? The notion of you can make Havdalah until Tuesday, because once we're at Wednesday, we're in the next half of the week, and that half of the week belongs to the next Shabbat. But it's not just that it belongs to the next Shabbat, it's that we've entered already like partial Shabbat. This is something also about the Sfirot system, yeah? Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet exists as a triad. But Tiferet is in a direct line with and balanced like Shekhinah. Does that make sense? And so it's kind of like Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, leaning heavily down to Shekhinah, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, getting closer to Shekhinah. And so the week isn't really a week. You know, I read an article in like Psychology Today that the key to productivity, I wouldn't know, is breaking things down into sufficiently small units of time to remain motivated. Like if you try and do anything over a year, it doesn't happen. But if you say, well, I will do it once this week, it will happen. So the Kabbalists are really breaking the week down into 2 mystical experience weeks. Yes, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet. That's a rest. That's Shekhinah. That's already day 4. We already have a pause to embody what is to bring down the Shefa, the divine flow. And then the 6th day, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, it deepens it. You see, it's like the same thing again, trying to deepen so it's like It's like doing a stretch and then taking a pause and then coming back and doing the stretch again, but stretching deeper. That's what they're going for in the week. Does that make sense? This is the kind of flow they're talking about in the week. So it is for this reason, I believe, that L'chun Neranena is appended to the Shir Shel Yom for Wednesday, and some of the other kind of features of Wednesday as like a little bit of Shabbos. Okay. Any questions about this kind of throne or about this Kabbalistic breakdown of the week in this way? We're going to stay with it. Just this is kind of the introduction. That was more abstract than normal things, I think, in this that we've been doing, but that's where we are today.
Yeah,
so yes.
I'm finding a sort of poetic connection between talking about having an extra soul on this Malchut count twice in the week, or in this scheme of, 2 sets of 4.
Interesting. So yeah, so we're going to get to the extra soul in a sense, but your comment is very poignant, because it's not as if an extra soul just appears on Shabbat in this model of it, but an extra soul, there's a notion of an extra soul, a Binah Yetera. And by the way, this Binah Yetera, extra insight, which is an Neshamayat Yetera, an extra soul, is related to the upper sphere of Binah. And there is a sense in which it doesn't appear magically, but it evolves throughout the week in this system, right? When viewed that way. So that's an interesting point, that the soul isn't, that's what I take you to be saying. It's not just appearing on Shabbat, the extra soul, it's developing throughout the week. It's like, it's getting ready. And it's almost like one soul on Wednesday, 2 souls on Shabbat. You almost don't acquire any soul until Wednesday. Now, v'chol aviditayu dekulu ben yomin kadmayin uben yomin batrayin, avutayin b'yom deshabata hazahu dechtiv ve'chalohim b'yom hashvi'i da Shabbat v'dahu ragla revia de korsea v'itema ihachi mahu et shabbatotai tishmaru chirain el Shabbat d'maile shabbata v'shabbata d'yoma mamash letlon peruda. We're getting into good stuff. It's all good, but it's getting good. Okay, so now all the work of all of them, both the earlier and later days. Oh, so one thing, an artisan for each skill. Can't believe I left this out. An uman for the umanut. Netzach, Chod, and Yesod are described as an artisan for each skill. So this is a very specific description of the Sefirot, which will help us. Right? Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Netzach, Chod, and Yesod are each artisans of the skills of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet in this description of it. So these are the crafts, like carpentry, metallurgy, and I don't know, let's pick a third skill, basket weaving, and the skills, Netzach, Chod, Yesod are like the artisans, the basket weaver and the metallurgy, right? So they make it happen, as it were. They represent a sort of personality, something more emanated, more instantiated than, can you use that word? I'm going to use that word and say that you can instantiate something if you can substantiate it. They're more, hopefully people understand my my brain. So they're more tangible, because they're more close to the emanation. And of course, in the Zohar, Netzach and Hod represent the seats of prophecy, of Nevuah. And Nevi'im are prophesying, they're kind of in these realms a lot. This is where they're getting their prophecy. So this is where things are like getting real. They're about to happen. They're in closer communication with what is. And so that is part of it. Okay. I wanted to focus on that artisans of skills is a really interesting description because Netzach, Hod, and Yesod often don't get nearly as much attention as Chochmah, Bina, and Keter, or as Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferet in particular. Okay, so all the work of all of them, both earlier and later days, was dependent on the Sabbath day. As it is written, God included in it. Here they're rereading Vayachal Elohim Bayom HaShvi at the end of Genesis, in the end of creation. It says God concluded his work. Side note, the whole poetic beauty of that passage is in the play between Vayachal and Milacha and Kal. So Milacha, just short text, I think important here. God finished all of the milacha. Vayachal, he finished. Milacha reverses the lamed and the chaf. Yes, vayachal milacha, vayachal milacha. So the Torah, I don't know if you hear the reversal, is playing with the audible language of finishing creation and ceasing to do work by doing the thing in its opposite. Vayachal is the opposite of milacha because you're flipping two of the key letters in the shoresh. Yeah. And so that is, according to many academics, part of the beauty of it. And then kal, which also has a kaf and lamed, kind of does the same thing. Mikal milachto asher asa, right? Doing the same thing again. Kal milachto. So it's kind of just flipping the thing back and forth. The Zohar, which is very attentive to the sound of its own text, the audio quality, I think they're certainly aware of the play going on in this concluding chapter. I just am very fond of these texts as sound and how sound is important to the interpretation. It's a pet project of mine. One day I would love to write a book about it. Okay, so, but it won't happen. Okay, so here they're playing on vayachal, the key word, and not translating as finished, but understanding from it kolel, klal. They're kind of having an extra lamed, as it were, but understanding vayachal, maybe non-grammatically, to be from the root of not God finished, but God included in the seventh day the work that he had made. They're understanding vayachal and call all to be of the same meaning, yeah, not of different meanings. Call melachto, it's emphasizing. So all of it, which is to say, this is the Sabbath, the fourth leg of the throne, that a few things included in it. So it's kind of like Shabbat is included in the week. I think that's part of what the Zohar is going for. Like included in the very week Shabbat, the Makor HaBracha, the source of blessing, but also included in Shabbat, everything. So all of these things happen in Shabbat, which can be seen as kind of the midline. And so Chesed Gvura Shabbat, it's like it's included within it. Okay, I haven't said more than the text has said.
Are you, I just want, are you saying that these words malacha and vayachal, especially malacha, are also related to malchut because they share letters as well? Not just that there's the switching of the sequence between malacha and vayachal, but also that perhaps there's some Hebrew letter relation to malchut?
I wasn't saying that, but you're saying that. And so that's really interesting. Is the Zohar picking up malchut, which is their word for Shekhinah, for divine presence, which is a major part of Shabbat? Are they picking that up even in milacha? Are they hearing malchut, right? Is within it? Maybe they are. I don't know. Daniel Matt doesn't say it, but you said it. So can someone keep a list of questions to ask Daniel Matt one day? The expert, or maybe Joel Hecker, another expert. That should go on the list. Okay, I'll bli neder, without promising. I will try and ask a scholar, but it sounds good. It sounds plausible and intriguing as well. Okay, where were we? Oh, we did more. We did more in the Aramaic. Need to switch. Now you might ask, with a thumb, if so, why my Sabbaths you are to observe too? Right? It says et Shabbatotai tishmoru. The full pasuk is et Shabbatotai tishmoru. My Sabbaths you shall observe. Viet mikdashi tira'u ani Hashem, and you shall fear my sanctuary. I am God. It's in Vayikra in Parshat Kedoshim, if I'm not mistaken. Et Shabbatotai tishmoru. So what do we mean Sabbaths? Shabbatot, et Shabbatotai, my Shabbatot. Now the plain meaning is you should observe the Sabbath not once but every week. Yes, my Sabbaths, all the Sabbaths. Or maybe it means Sabbath of the work week and Sabbath of the land, Shabbat la'aretz, the Shemitah cycle, next year. But the answer is, so here they say, there are two, there's more, no, just like there's Wednesday and Shabbos, there's Shabbos and Shabbos. There's the Sabbath of Sabbath Eve and the Sabbath of Sabbath day itself, which are indivisible. Now, of course, these represent two different parts of God. So, of course, they're indivisible because we only have one God, the great tension of emanation of the Sefirot, one God and 10 emanated entities that we're referring to independently. So, which are, now, what are these two entities? So, there are kind of three parts to Shabbat that are referred to as Shabbat. So it's important to understand all of them, or four. There's Bina, which is kind of like, think of that as upper Shabbat, upper Shabbat. Then there's Tiferet Yesod. That can be a link because sometimes it's Tiferet and sometimes it's Yesod. Of course, Yesod being the next step out of Tiferet. The point here is, think of this, and by the way, think of Bina as the Ari referred to Bina Aim, as mother, as divine mother, except the Zohar is going to call her king in the next paragraph, but think of her as divine mother for the moment. And then there's Tiferet Yesod. Think of this as husband. Think of this as Kudsha Brichu, or Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One. Think of this as male. Think of this as husband. Think of this as God who is poised to create, right? God poised to create. In a particularly masculine context, Yesod representing Joseph, who's not just a ruler, but he's viewed as someone who resists the temptation of Eshet Potiphar. He's sexually righteous and therefore merits the covenant and creation. And then there's Shekhinah. So like Sabbath, there's one, there's two, and there's three. Now, these parts of Shabbat are often referred to in poems. There's a poem for each of the Shabbat meals, Atkinu Sudata, written in part by the Ari and in part taken from passages in the Zohar itself in Parshat Yitro, supposedly written by the Ari. There's some skepticism that he wrote it. We don't have much written from the Ari himself, but it could be that these Atkinu Sudata poems are in part talking about which unions are occurring at which meal in the poems written for each of the Shabbat meals. So when the Zohar says there's two Shabbos, right now we're talking just about like Tiferet, or here Tiferet Yesod, but the masculine aspect of it in particular, so Yesod and Malchut. We're talking about this space, yeah? The union that occurs here between God wanting to create and God emanating full creation. Shabbat bringing life into existence, the reason in a telos kind of sense for existence. So those are the two Shabboses. Now, just a word about this. We're going to get there a little more, but in the davening, this Kabbalistic insight about two Shabboses, and we're going to spell it out almost explicitly in the next passages, made it into the text. in the text that you would say if you went to any synagogue. And this would be true, I think, any denomination of any major American denomination. These ideas are there. And you've been saying it all along and referencing it. You may not have known. Because when Shabbos is described, well, what word are you going to use to describe Shabbat if you don't say Shabbat? So in each of the requests, we say V'yanuchu vo, I'll rest in it, masculine, or V'yanuchu va, I'll rest in Shabbat, feminine, or V'yanuchu vam, I'll rest in Shabbats, Shabbatot. So there's different, you can use different pronouns. What are Shabbat's pronouns? This sounds like some kind of postmodern nightmare. What are Shabbat's pronouns? So no, this is the Zohar. So the point is that, Shekhinah, when we want to refer to Shabbat as Malchut, as Shekhinah is the primary element of Shabbat, we're going to refer to it in feminine language, V'yanuchu va, which is, of course, what we do on the Friday night Amidah, V'yanuchu va, for this reason, because of the Zohar. When Shabbat is masculine, Shabbat day in our case, we're going to refer to it as V'yanuchu vo. And when it's all of it, at the end of Shabbat, and we've done the full Shabbat, V'yanuchu vam, in them. So so there are plain reasons given in some of the Siddur commentaries, but the actual reasons in this case are mystical. And so we're going to get to it. We'll get to why it goes
I just
out
add a footnote on that.
here.
And I think, unfortunately, the conservative Siddur, with its scholarly dikduk people, only left va on all three amidot. But any traditional Siddur, has va for the Friday night, vo for the Saturday morning, and vam for mincha. So for those who daven with, Sim Shalom, I'm sorry that they did not pick up on the mystical meaning of that. But Heschel has it in his famous book on Shabbat that I'm sure Peter knows, on the va, vo, vam, which I think is nice.
Does he speak
Shabbat,
about this?
to think about it as the day moving from, kind of separation and all coming together at mincha. So,
in defense of Sim Shalom, possibly. To offer a limud zchut, it could be that the original language of the Amidah before mystics interfered with the text of the Siddur was in fact Va. And so they could be saying, well, this is the authentic original text in the earliest Siddurim we have or something. I don't know that, but it wouldn't shock me if academics went and looked, and actually before the Zohar became famous and whatnot, this wasn't a common textual change. Speaking of which, we're about to get to more textual changes that we made because of the Zohar or didn't make. And in this one, the Ashkenazic doesn't have it, but the Hasidic texts do, and the Sephardic texts that Mizrahi Jews do. So 2/3 of kind of the Jewish world, namely Sephardic Jewry and Hasidic Jewry, adopted the Zohar's suggested change, but the Ashkenazic world did not. So even like in Beth Shalom, well, actually only in Chabad will you get the Zohar's change in Providence. Okay, but we'll get there. So, so let's go back. Amar lahu taya dehava tayim b'chaya. So you might remember there was a what is Daniel Matt calls him, like a rambling donkey driver. Here they call him someone who is driving the donkeys. There's the donkey driver. Later in Hasidic literature, this person will become like the wagon driver. And they're always secret scholars, whether they know it or not. They appear to be these very, like your cabbie, right? Your Uber driver. Is maybe the modern analog. You get into an Uber, and before you know it, you're discussing the most mystical insights that could ever be with the Uber driver. This only happened to me once, by the way, that I got into an Uber on the way to APAC, actually. And or maybe it was Lyft, and I was going, where was I going? To the airport? To the airport. And they saw the kippah, and they said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." "Why?" And they said, "Oh, well, I'm Hindu, but I've been studying the Zohar for years, and I had some questions. And they started to ask the most complex questions, and they were like fully aware, we're practically fluent in the Zohar's version of Aramaic, and I frankly was lost. Okay, so, but shocked. So this is that. Amar Alutaya to have a time betrayers, the donkey driver that's sitting behind them overhearing this conversation between Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Elazar says, Umahu mikdashi tira. Wait, you explained the verse, but you didn't explain the end of the verse. Your teaching implicit in the donkey driver's comment can't be full because there's a whole nother part of the verse. Umikdashi tira'u ani Hashem, and you should fear my sanctuary. So Amar le Kiddusha de Shabbat. Amar le Umahu Kiddusha de Shabbat. Amar le da Kiddusha de Itmashcha. Mile'ela. Amar le Ihachi Avidat the Shabbat de Labiu Kodesh. Ala Kiddusha de Shara lo Mile'ela. So let me just complete this. Amar Rabbi Abba. V'hachihu v'karata l'Shabbat oneg l'kdosh Hashem mechubad. Idkar Shabbat l'chud u'kdosh Hashem l'chud. Amar lei hachiman k'dosh Hashem. Amar lei kedusha dinachta mil'ela v'sharya lei. Amar lei ikdusha dimashka mil'ela ikri mechubad. Idchasi de Shabbat laviu mechubad. Ukti v'chibadato. Okay, so the reason I did it twice is because they have a back and forth, and I don't want to interrupt it. So go back and forth here. So here the Arab. So the tie is always an Arab, and in the Talmud usually the Arab is you imagine wrapped in like a head scarf. I think is what the term is officially for. I think, and so this Arab donkey driver is goading behind them and says, and what is this verse? And what about the rest of the verse? Because your teaching can't work if you can't explain the whole verse. He replied, almost summoning Heschel, but many years before, when it says you should observe my Sabbaths and my sanctuary, you're told in awe, this is the holiness of the Sabbath. Yeah, the sanctuary, what's the sanctuary? It's a sanctuary in time, of course. The sanctuary is the Kedusha that comes from the Shabbat. It's not Shabbat itself, but it's the holiness, the Kedusha, which emanates out of Shabbat, is the sanctuary. Actually, Heschel must have had this, he must have had this passage in mind, yes. So he said, what is the holiness of the Sabbath? So he said, that's nice, the holiness that stems from the Sabbath. But that is just, what's that? You know, like define that for me. Otherwise, this conversation appears bland. The holiness of the Sabbath. What's the holiness of the Sabbath? No, it's the holiness that comes out of Shabbos. Well, what's that? What's the holiness that comes out of Shabbos? He replied, this is holiness drawn down from above. Yeah, Shabbos, in other words, is a receptacle that contains holiness which comes from above. So when you observe Shabbos, it draws down Kedusha from above, what we might call in the Zohar Yeridat HaShefa, the flowing down of the divine flow. He said, if so, he rejects it now. That's no good.
One quick question. You added a phrase that's not present in this text. You said, when you observe the Sabbath, you draw down the Kedusha. But the text is just talking about the Sabbath itself drawing down the Kedusha. So that seems like you're adding obviously an important thing. I know the idea that when you observe it, you help draw it down, but is it not drawn down except in being observed?
So we're going to see that a little more explicitly, but I think that for that, so that I put that in to link the currently unreferenced first part of the verse. I did say that with some deliberation, actually, so I'm glad you asked. Et Shabbatai Tishmo, the first part was observe the Sabbath. And we said, well, observing the Sabbath actually means like these two Shabboses. Yeah, there are two parts of it. There's like the masculine part and the feminine part. But in practice, it's still observing it is the plain meaning of the text. And so the sense is when you do that through Shabbat, then you draw down a Kedusha. So I think the reason is it's because the second part of the verse. Then I'm adding then et mikdashi tira'u as opposed to and et mikdashi tira'u. I'm making the clauses of the verse conditional. So ve'et shabtotai tishmoru umikdashi tira'u. And then you have awe of, and why? Because mikdashi tira'u, you can have lower fear of the sanctuary, but here it means have awe of the thing that comes from it. So have awe of the thing that comes from observance, which is the Kedusha of Shabbos. That's the proposed interpretation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the donkey driver rejects it. It says, no, you've turned the Sabbath into something not holy, except for the holiness that rests upon it from above. You're demeaning Shabbos. Shabbos isn't holy unless you draw it down. Right? So actually your question, Andy, is the donkey driver's rejection in a sense. Right? Is not Shabbos holy me'elav, of its own accord? Does it need our observance and drawing down divine flow into it to become real? Shabbos is Shabbos. In other words, the end of creation, Shabbos is sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, right? God's end result was his first thought, says the poet in Lecha Dodi. So this is the goal of God, to draw things down. And God is present in our world, whether independent of our actions. So this is the crux of the Zohar, actually, right here, which is how much does the presence of God in our world depend on our cultivation of a mystical frame of mind to make it so, versus how much is the fact that we exist currently reflective of that fact, regardless of the state of our own mystical awareness. So it's not just the donkey driver, in my read of it. I'm trying to give drama to the narrative, not just the words. Rejecting the interpretation of the verse, it's the donkey driver who, by the way, is living the life of a donkey driver and not a mystic with the Zohar crew, even though we're going to later learn he's the son of a mystic. Shocker. But he's rejecting their whole occupation and saying, look, Shabbos is holy. In fact, it's so holy that all of your human calculations kind of degrade it, right? You intend to make it so holy with your fancy mystical, intentions, but Shabbos is actually holiest when it doesn't rely on you having complex mystical intentions. That's how I'm translating. If so, you've turned the Shabbat into something not holy, except for the holiness that rests upon it from above. And that's not right. So Rabbi Abba then said, quoting Isaiah.
May I interrupt here? Before you enter into the answer to that, I have a not entirely related question from the verse before. So, which was just simply the note to note 215 in the mat, refers to talking about the donkey drivers. And this is one of several wandering donkey drivers who annoy, perplex, and enlighten the companions on the road with a capital C. So I hadn't seen that expression before. Are the companions just the mystics, the Kabbalists, anybody? Is that like an official category? The companions?
So the companions are what are probably, since he's using capital C, going to use the term chevraya, which is the Zohar's term when it wants to refer to a defined set of mystics who are the enlightened ones. And so chevraya from chaver. So in the Talmudic version of it, right, a chaver is someone who eats truma and who can be relied upon to have taken out the related tithes and other things for produce in the land of Israel. A chaver, it's like someone who has smicha, but it means not someone who's kashrut you can trust, because they actually act stricter than the law in some cases. But a chaver is like a learned member of the rabbinic class who you can trust to not have produce that's missing, that it has prohibited food in it. So the Zohar's version, the chevraya, which is a play on chaver, is like the mystics who are in the know, so to speak. But they have a very distinct group of, I don't know how many, probably about 12 to 20 specific people, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Eliezer, the people. It's talking about the cast, actually, would be a fine way to say it, the cast of characters in the Zohar. But not the donkey driver. He's kind of like a foil, actually. He's a foil. That's the classic literary device being used here, if we would just use that word. Could save other words. So, maybe I'll end on this note. The verses from Isaiah are the source for all the rabbinic obligations of Shabbat, including the meals and things like that, and become very important. So Rabbi Abba said, so it is, V'karata l'Shabbat oneg, you should call the Sabbath a delight. Of course, this verse, the source for the idea of oneg Shabbat, of delighting in Shabbos, the source for fancy meals and other things. Kadosh Hashem mechubad, the holy of God who is honored. Sabbath and holy of God are each mentioned separately. So you see that there's Shabbos, and then there's holy of God. So holiness is related to God, and Shabbos is a human delight. You have to bring the holiness of God into Shabbos. So Rabbi Abba is replying to him, you see. He's saying, no, I have a proof text from Isaiah that you're wrong, that Shabbos does in fact need our mystical intention in order to be filled with holiness. There's holiness from God, and there's calling the Sabbath a delight. And I have to bring down that holiness into Shabbat. Shabbat and the holy God are each mentioned separately. So he said, the donkey driver, if so, who is holy of God? He replied, holiness that descends from above, resting upon it. He said, if holiness drawn down from above is called honored, then it appears that the Sabbath is not honored, and yet it is written, and honor it. So, you would say like Shabbos isn't worthy of honor in and of itself. It's only honorable to the extent that it has flow from Hashem, and yet we have a commandment to honor Shabbat. Shabbat itself, not Shabbat if it's observed in the right way. Shabbat when it's filled, if you imagine a cookie jar with cookies of mystical fruit. Shabbat itself is worthy of honor, and Shabbat is holy. So then the next piece, and we'll conclude here, right? Rabbi Lezer says to Rabbi Abba, we didn't quote this in the Aramaic, let him be, within him lies a new word we do not know. In other words, he's refuted us. He's refuted our idea that Shabbos needs our thing, but also who is this guy in layman's terms? Let's let him say what he's going to say. He's got something that clearly he's not the donkey driver we thought, but let's let him speak. So next week, we are going to discuss the proposed change to the text of Kiddush by the donkey driver. He changes the Friday night Kiddush, and in fact has for 2/3 of Jewry, or at least 2/3 of the denominations of Jewry, not the official denominations like I said, Hasidim and Mizrahi, and what that means. Like he changes the whole notion of mystical Shabbat from something you must put into Shabbat to something inherent. So we're gonna get there. I think this text is very rich, and it's actually maybe the heart of the Zohar, kind of arguing with itself through the character of the donkey driver as a foil. I hope you have enjoyed this edition of Midweek Mysticism, episode 2 of Wednesday, the Shabbat you didn't know about, but really so much more than that.
Just to pop in with an answer to a question at the beginning, it was Abraham Abulafia, 13th century, who was concerned that the Sefirot, that the 10 Sefirot was even more of a challenge to God's unity than the Christian Trinity. Although he's a Kabbalist, so he ends up understanding the Sefirot as God's creations, but not aspects of God, because lest it violate the unity of God. So that was the thing.
It's interesting because he was originally a critic of the Kabbalah, but then became probably the most controversial Kabbalist who ever lived, possibly. And he becomes super important to the Ari Kabbalah, but they never published the sections of Rav Chaim Vital's work, the 4th section, which quotes his techniques. But it's widely presumed that actually the great Kabbalists were using his secret meditative and almost prophetic techniques. He had prophetic techniques, but they weren't quoting him because he was so controversial. So that's interesting that he said it, because he's a lightning rod in Kabbalah.
That's right.
As a personality. But cool.
There you
All
go.
right. Well, it's good for him.
All right.
I wonder if he said it in the first part of his life where he was a philosopher and really a Maimonidean. He kind of.
Interesting. That I wouldn't know. I have to run as well. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thanks, everyone.
It's always a pleasure. Always such a joy. Happy Hanukkah.
So before the meditators come on, and I think I'll stay, but I just wanted you to know that the question that I was asking about the letters relates to something I'm writing about, ways of thinking about creation or making in Ki Tisa, because of Betzalel, the Midrash about Betzalel.